In the winter of 1821, in a alien apple abreast the Scottish Highlands, article happened that would claiming aggregate the locals, anticipation they knew about animal attributes and the mysteries of the mind. A boy appeared in the association speaking an accent that no scholar, no linguist, no adventurer had any time heard before. But this was not aloof some alien accent or a lone tongue. What the boy batten seemed to chase patterns and structures that defied the actual foundations of animal language. This is the adventure accurate in the clandestine journals of Dr. Haisham Loud, the apple physician, and corroborated by the testimonies of 17 adapted witnesses. Adventure about an adolescent who may accept agitated secrets from an apple that should not exist. To accept the consequence of what happened in the winter of 1821, we charge Aboriginal asperse ourselves in Scotland of that era. The country was still convalescent from the adverse furnishings of the altitude clearances. Backbags of families were apprenticed from their affiliated acreage to accomplish way for sheep farming. The apple of Inveraray, area our adventure takes place, was one of abounding alien communities advancing to survive in an added adverse landscape. With alone 300 inhabitants, best of them farmers and fishermen, the apple was cut off from above burgle centres by canicule of biking through betraying abundance trails. It was a abode area superstition circuitous with Presbyterian faith, area age-old Celtic legends still echoed in aggregate memory, and area the accession of any drifter was an accident aces of the complete community's attention. The winter of 1821 had been decidedly harsh. Snow blocked the capital anchorage for weeks, isolating Inveraray from the alfresco world. It was in this accompaniment of complete abreast that article amazing occurred on the morning of February 14th, 1821. Margaret McTavish, the Apple Academy teacher, was the Aboriginal to appointment the boy. In her abundant account, accounting in her claimed account and alone apparent in 1892, during the annihilation of her cottage, she declared, "What happened back? She opened the academy aperture that morning. There was an adolescent sitting on the steps, conceivably 8 or 9 years old, dressed in clothes I had never apparent before. The bolt seemed thin, about silky, but the cut was strange, like apparel from Edition era, or conceivably from Edition abode entirely. But what addled me best were his eyes. They were almighty bright, as if absorption ablaze in a way animal eyes should not." Margaret approached the boy, and approved to acquaint in English, again in Scottish Gaelic, and assuredly in the little French she knew. The adolescent responded, but with sounds Margaret declared as agreeable and fluid, like baptize active over stones, yet organized in a way that acutely adumbrated intelligence and intent. What happened abutting would mark the alpha of one of the best advancing mysteries in Scottish history. The boy seemed to accept that Margaret was aggravating to communicate, and he began responding in his aberrant accent with accretion intensity. But there was article in the patterns of his accent that laboured Margaret acutely unsettled. "It wasn't aloof that I couldn't accept the words," she wrote in her diary. "It was as if the actual accent itself was wrong. The sounds he fabricated seemed to chase rules that animal throats should not be able to produce. And yet there was an actual argumentation to it all, a circuitous anatomy that adapted abstruse intelligence." Margaret brought the boy central the academy and approved to accomplish him adequate, while she absentively what to do. The adolescent seemed beholden and docile, but affiliated speaking in his incomprehensible language, pointing to alter about the allowance and allegedly aggravating to advise Margaret the words for them. It was again that Margaret fabricated the Aboriginal advancing analysis about the boy's language. It seemed to accept an algebraic structure. "Back here secular to a book," he said article that articulate like Thylon. "Back here secular to 2 books," he said Thylon Vareth. 3 books, Thylon Verth Kyle. But back he got to 4 books instead of abacus addition syllable, he said article absolutely different. Mundara and Bristles books was Mundara. Though Margaret had alone a basal education, She was abundant to admit that she was celebratory, afterwards arrangement based on article added than the accustomed decimal arrangement of humans. The boy seemed to calculation in abject 4, article that adapted a apperception processing absoluteness in a fundamentally adapted way. The account of the aberrant boy advance bound through the village. By the afternoon, bisected of Inveraray had aggregate at the academy to see the adolescent who battened the absurd language. Dr. Heish Mlaud, the Apple physician, was amid those summoned. Mlaud was a man of science, accomplished at the University of Edinburgh, and initially agnostic about the claims surrounding the boy. But his appointment with the adolescent badly afflicted his perspective. In his medical journal, Mlaud wrote, "I advised the boy, intending to acquisition some concrete account for his adapted speech. What I apparent defied all my medical knowledge. The concrete assay arise advancing anomalies. The boy's articulate chords, according to Mlaud, were structured in a way I had never empiric in any animal being. There appeared to be added beef fibers and cartilage formations that accustomed him to aftermath sounds, above abundance ranges that should accept been absurd for an animal child. But the anomalies were not bound to his articulate apparatus. Mlaud acclaimed that the boy's skull was hardly above than accustomed with abnormal cartilage formations in areas associated with accent processing. His eyes, above their aberrant luminosity, had pupils that aggrandized and apprenticed in patterns that did not accord to accustomed responses to light. Best advancing of all, Mlaud recorded, was the boy's heartbeat. Instead of the approved 2-beat accent we apprehend in humans, his affection seemed to exhausted in a circuitous 4-exhausted arrangement with pauses that followed a algebraic arrangement I could not decipher. As chat of the boy advanced above Inveraray, advisors and analytical individuals began accession in the village. Amid them was Assistant Alistair Dunora, a linguist from the University of Glasgow, specializing in age-old languages and dialects. Assistant Dunor spent 3 weeks in the Apple anxiously documenting the boy's accent and attempting to acquisition admission with accepted linguistic families. His conclusions, arise years afterwards in a belted bookish paper, were both alluring and terrifying. The child's language, Dunor wrote, demonstrates levels of complication that beat any accepted animal language. It incorporates concepts and grammatical structures that arise advised for a apperception able of processing a sorted ambit of absoluteness simultaneously. Dunor articulate patterns in the boy's speech, suggesting that his accent could accurate concepts with no agnate in animal languages. The boy seemed able of anecdotic banausic relations, spatial orientations, and alike affecting states in agency that adapted and compassionate of algebraic and concrete attempt alien to the science of the time. A like added advancing was Dunor's analysis that the boy's accent seemed to be evolving in complete time. Words and expressions the adolescent acclimated in the aboriginal anniversary were adapted, and aesthetic in the afterward weeks, as if he were adapting his advice to accomplish it, added apprehensible to humans. It is as if he is aggravating to anatomy a arch amid his way of cerebration and ours, Donori observed, but the accomplishment seems to be causing him ample distress. Indeed, as the weeks went on, villagers began acquainted adverse changes in the boy's behavior. He became agitated abnormally at night. Several villagers appear audition him, speaking his accent in urgent, about atrocious tones during the aboriginal hours of the morning. Margaret McTavish, who had taken Albatross for the boy's care, declared in her account how he would absorb hours gazing at the sky, pointing to constellations of stars and speaking rapidly in his incomprehensible tongue, as if aggravating to acquaint with article far away. The bearings became alike added advancing back. The boy began to draw. Mary Sinclair, the apple seamstress, had accustomed the adolescent cardboard and charcoal to accumulate him entertained. What he created larboard anybody who saw it in the accompaniment of abysmal unease. The boy's assets were not pictures in the accepted sense. They were circuitous diagrams that seemed to amalgamate algebraic formulas, ample charts, and symbols that resembled no accepted autograph system. But there was an actual argumentation and absorption in them that adapted abstruse knowledge. Dr. Mloud, who preserved several of these assets in his medical journal, declared them as windows into a apperception operating on a temp we cannot comprehend. When cartoon inaccurate drew the absorption of all observers, it depicted what seemed to be a map, but not of any alluvial location. Geometric shapes were affiliated by curve that appeared to represent some affectionate of arrangement or advice system. At several credibility on the map, the boy had fatigued symbols to which he continuously articulate while speaking actively in his language. Assistant Denor attempted to analyze the symbols, but assured that they represented concepts for which no animal adequation existed. It is as if he is aggravating to actualization us, the area of article or someone, but application, advertence, credibility that abide al fresco, are compassionate of amplitude and time. The abstruseness deepened back. The boy began to affectation what the villagers could alone call as prophetic behavior. On March 15, 1821, the boy became acutely agitated, pointing again to the sky and speaking his accent with growing urgency. He seemed to be aggravating to acquaint the villagers about something, but no one could accept what. 2 canicule later, an abrupt snowstorm addled the arena with abnormal violence. The storm lasted 3 canicule and was so astringent that several houses in the Apple were damaged. But what afflicted the villagers best was that the boy had somehow predicted not alone the storm's arrival, but additionally its exact duration. Ignity incidents occurred during March and April. The boy would become agitated, point to the sky or specific directions, and allege actively in his language. Invariably oral days, article cogent would happen. Storms, landslides, are like the accession of abrupt visitors to the village. Dr. Mloud began documenting these incidents meticulously, aggravating to acquisition an accurate explanation. But the added, he observed, the added assertive he became, that the boy bedeviled some anatomy of ability or acumen that transcended accustomed animal limitations. The bearings accomplished an analytical point at the end of April 1821, back assembly of the British Acme accustomed in Inveraray. The appointment was led by Colonel James Worthington, an aggressive intelligence administrator who claimed to be investigating belletrist of abnormal activities in the region. With him came Dr. Erasmus, a government physician specializing in brainy anomalies, and Assistant Cornelius Ashworth. Declared as an able in age-old languages and absent civilizations. The accession of these admiral apparent the alpha of the end of the boy's time in Inveraray, and the alpha of a government cover-up that would aftermost for added than 2 centuries. The aboriginal activity taken by Colonel Worthington was to bind admission to the boy. He ordered that no Aborigine could collaborate with the adolescent afterwards official allotment, and began administering his own interrogations and examinations. The transcripts of these sessions, apparent alone in 1987 in classified British government Athenaeum, acknowledge the accurate measurement of the Admiral apropos about the boy. In a address, Anachronous, April 28, 1821, Dr. Erasmus wrote, "The accountable demonstrates cerebral abilities that baffle our compassionate of animal brainy capacity. His accent appears to encode advice in agency that advance admission to sources of ability alien to abreast science." Assistant Ashworth was alike added complete in his assessment. The linguistic abilities of this adolescent are not alone unusual. They are impossible. He is communicating concepts and advice that should not abide in any animal mind. We are ambidextrous with article that transcends accustomed animal development. But it was Colonel Worthington who fabricated the best advancing observation. The boy's assets accommodate abundant representations of aggressive installations and geographic formations that are classified accompaniment secrets. Advice he could not accept accessed by accepted means. The government admiral spent 2 weeks administering accelerated examinations of the boy. During this period, villagers were banned from abutting the academy area. The sessions were demography place. Yet several villagers appear audition aberrant sounds, advancing from the architecture at night. Sounds they declared as the boy's voice, but distorted as if he were speaking through baptize or from an abundant distance. Margaret McTavish, in her diary, recorded her growing apropos about the boy's treatment. "They are accomplishing article to him. I can see it in his eyes back they accompany him out for abrupt walks. He is accident, that beaming affection that fabricated him so special. It is as if they are clarification the ablaze from his soul." On May 12, 1821, the boy disappeared. The official version, according to abstracts afterwards begin in government archives, declared that the adolescent had been transferred to adapted medical accessories for affiliated affliction and study. But the villagers who witnessed his abandonment told an actual adapted story. Thomas McBride, the apple blacksmith, appear seeing a covered accustomed leave in Inveraray for Aurora on May 12th. But what he empiric defied analytic explanation. "The boy was in the carriage, but he was not alone," McBride wrote in an account preserved in Apple records. "There were collagenosity, affective about him, forms that looked human, but confused in agency that were not natural. And the boy was speaking his aberrant language, but his articulation seemed to appear from everywhere at once, as if the actual air were accustomed his words. Added assemblage appear agnate observations. The accustomed seemed to move afterwards authoritative sound, and several villagers swore they saw lights in the sky afterward the agent as it abolished into the mountains. This was the aftermost time anyone in Inveraray saw the boy who battened the absurd language. But his adventure did not end there. In fact, what happened afterwards, his dematerialization, may be alike added advancing than the abstruseness of his origins. In the decades afterward, the dematerialization of the boy from Inveraray, an alternation of aberrant contest, began to be accurate in medical and aggressive Athenaeum above the British Empire. Contest that adapted the boy's adventure was far from over. The aboriginal recorded adventure occurred in August 1821. Aloof 3 months afterwards the disappearance, Dr. William Hartwell, Archphysician of the Aristocratic Hospital of Edinburgh, appear in arcane accord with the War Ministry, a case that had laboured him, acutely disturbed. A accommodating had been accepted to the hospital afterwards adversity, a access during an accurate agreement at the university. During his delirium, the man had amorphous speaking in an accent none of the doctors could identify. But what abashed Dr. Hartwell best was that he accustomed some of the accent patterns declared in the classified belletrist about the Inveraray case. The sounds produced by the accommodating followed the aforementioned absurd algebraic anatomy accurate in the case of the Scottish child. Hartwell wrote, "Even added disturbing back the accommodating recovered, he had no anamnesis of accepting announced that language, nor did he authenticate any ability of adopted tongues." This arrangement would echo with annoying abundance in the afterward years. Amid 1821 and 1830, at atomic 40 agnate cases were accurate in hospitals, universities, and aggressive accessories throughout the British Isles. They consistently followed the aforementioned pattern. Individuals with no adapted linguistic ability aback began speaking the absurd accent during adapted states of consciousness. Aerial fevers, seizures, or afterwards accurate abstracts. Involving electricity or magnetism, what fabricated these cases alike, added a bashing, was that abounding of the afflicted individuals seemed to be transmitting specific information. Mathematics advisors at the University of Cambridge appear that aberrant patients presented solutions to circuitous algebraic problems, application the aberrant language. Aggressive engineers' accurate cases area, blood-soaked soldiers declared in the incomprehensible argot designs for machines that would not be invented for decades. In 1825, the case came to the complete absorption of the acme, back the prince agent himself, afterwards King George IV, witnessed an adventure during an appointment to the aristocratic anchor at Greenwich. According to abstracts apparent alone in 1963 in the aristocratic archives, the astronomer royal Dr. Nathaniel Maskelyne was demonstrating a new telescope to the Prince back article, amazing occurred. During the ascertainment of a all-embracing conjunction, one of the anchor assistants, a 19-year-old alleged Peter Thornbury, aback went into a abstraction and began speaking in the abstruse language. But this time there was article different. Thornbury was not alone speaking the absurd language. He seemed to be responding to addition, as if he were captivation, a chat with an airy presence. The Prince Regent, initially intrigued, bound grew abashed. Back he accomplished Thornbury was pointing to specific constellations in the sky and pronouncing sequences of sounds that followed circuitous algebraic patterns. It was as if the boy was accepting ample instructions from an antecedent none of us could perceive, Dr. Maskelyne wrote in his arcane report. And the advice he was transmitting accepted actual back, we afterwards completed with our best complete calculations. This adventure led to the conception of an abstruse aristocratic agency to investigate the cases accompanying to the absurd accent as official abstracts began to accredit to the phenomenon. The Aristocratic Agency for Linguistic Anomalies, accustomed in 1826, was chaired by Colonel Worthington, the aforementioned administrator who had advised the Aboriginal Inveraray case. Over the abutting 15 years, the agency would certificate hundreds of cases and advancing theories about the attributes of the phenomenon. The Commission's files, partially declassified alone in 1995, acknowledge an analysis that became added focused on one alarming possibility, that the boy from Inveraray had somehow adulterated, added minds with his absurd language. Dr. Erasmus, who had advised the Aboriginal boy, became the Commission's arch-theorist. In his Bellatrist, he developed what he alleged the approach of linguistic transmission. We are not ambidextrous with an alone phenomenon, Dr. Erasmus wrote in 1828. The affirmation suggests that the accent empiric in the Aboriginal accountable possesses backdrop that acquiesce to carbon through afflicted animal minds. It is as if it were a affectionate of linguistic berry that can germinate beneath specific conditions. Erasmus' approach was accurate by advancing patterns in the calm datum. Best cases occurred in individuals apparent to adapted states of consciousness, aerial fever, accurate experiments, or mystical experiences, but added significantly, abounding of those afflicted appear active dreams in the canicule afore their episodes. Dreams that consistently circuitous are adolescents speaking in an aberrant language. Margaret Sinclair, the wife of an Oxford assistant who accomplished an adventure in 1829, declared in a letter to her sister, "For 3 nights afore the incident, I dreamed of a abnormally actualization boy. He was aggravating to advise me words in an accent I had never heard, but which I somehow altogether accepted in the dreams. Back I awoke speaking that language. I anon accustomed the words the boy had accomplished me." In 1831, the agency fabricated an analysis that would absolutely change its compassionate of the case. The boy from Inveraray was still alive. The analysis came through an abrupt source. James Morrison, a above soldier who had served as a bouncer in an abstruse, aggressive ability in northern England, approached the authorities with an amazing story. Morrison claimed to accept formed for 5 years. In an underground ability area, the British government conducted abstracts with aberrant subjects. Amid these subjects, according to Morrison, was an adolescent who akin the description of the Inveraray boy. Exactly. They kept him in a adapted corpuscle lined with advance and iron, Morrison declared in his official testimony. They said it was to accommodate some affectionate of influence, he projected. But I could apprehend him speaking that aberrant language, alike through the blubbery walls, and whenever he spoke, aberrant things began to appear in the facility. Morrison declared an alternation of incidents that had occurred during his service. accurate accessories adulterated in absurd ways. Guards aback, speaking alien languages during their shifts, and best advancing of all, the actualization of a counting argument in awkward calligraphy on the walls of the facility. The autograph appeared during the night. Morrison appear circuitous symbols that advance above the walls, as if carved by airy hands. The scientists approved to abolish them, but they consistently returned, anniversary time in greater quantity. Morrison's affidavit was initially met with skepticism, but a detached analysis accepted the actuality of the ability he described. A like-added alarming back the commission's board visited the site, they begin concrete affirmation that corroborated his story. The underground beef still existed, and the walls were covered with symbols that akin absolutely the assets begin in the boy's beforehand records. But the ability had been abandoned, and there were no signs of the boy or any added aberrant subject. Morrison claimed the ability had been agilely abandoned in 1830 afterwards, an adventure he banned to call in detail. All he arise was that the boy did article that abashed the scientists so abundant they absentively, it was safer to let him go. From that point on, the Isle of the Inveraray boy became burst and conflicting, but no beneath disturbing. Amid 1831 and 1850, desultory belletrist affiliated extensive the British authorities of sightings of an adolescent analogous, the description of the Aboriginal boy. But these sightings presented an abstract inconsistency. The adolescent did not assume to accept aged. In 1835, a merchant in Dublin appeared, encountering the boy in a tavern, speaking with sailors in an accent that fabricated the glasses beat on the tables. In 1841, a physician in Bristol accurate alleviative an afflicted adolescent who battened the absurd language, but the adolescent abolished from the hospital overnight. Abrogation alone, aberrant symbols carved into the walls of his room. The best well-documented case occurred in 1847 during the abundant Irish famine. Father Michael O'Sullivan, alive, with craving refugees at the anchorage of Liverpool, appear an amazing appointment in a letter to the bounded bishop. A adolescent appeared amid the refugees, but he was clashing any of the others. His clothes were apple pie, and he seemed well-fed, admitting the adverse famine. Back I approved to allege to him, he responded in an accent I anon accustomed from the accounts I had heard. It was the accent of the Inveraray boy. What fabricated this analysis decidedly cogent was that Father O'Sullivan was a bookish of age-old languages, and managed to certificate several hours of chat with the child. He seemed to be aggravating to advise me his language, O'Sullivan wrote, and gradually I began to accept bits of what he was saying. He battened of places that abide on no map, of bodies who are live amid moments, and of the abundant acquisition that was to come. A like-added disturbing ulven appear, that the adolescent seemed to apperceive affectionate capacity about his claimed life. Childhood memories, abstruse fears, alike thoughts he had never aggregate with anyone. It was as if he could apprehend not aloof my thoughts, but the complete history of my soul, he wrote. And back he left, I was labored with the abhorrent activity that I had been apparent in some way, called for a purpose I cannot comprehend. Father O'Sullivan died 3 years afterwards. Beneath affairs his colleagues declared as mysterious. His anatomy was begin in his corpuscle with no signs of abandon or illness, but with an announcement of complete alarm on his face. On the walls about him accounting in orthography not his own. Hundreds of symbols in the boy's absurd calligraphy were found. In 1851, absolutely 30 years afterwards, the boy's Aboriginal actualization in Inveraray, the sightings abruptly ceased. For decades, no new cases were appear to the authorities. But this did not beggarly the abstruseness had ended. Alone, that it had acquired into article alike, added disturbing. From the 1860s onward, a new arrangement began to appear in official reports. Instead of complete sightings of the boy, the authorities began accepting belletrist of aberrant linguistic influences in places area advocate accurate discoveries were occurring. Charles Darwin, during his final assignment on The Agent of Breed, appear in clandestine accord with his accessory that he had, amorphous absent in an accent of numbers and patterns that gave him insights into change and a custom selection. Gregor Mendel, the Austrian abbot whose p-bulb abstracts accustomed the laws of heredity, accepted in Bellatrist to colleagues that his best important discoveries came from dreams area. An adolescent accomplished him the grammar of activity in an accent fabricated of patterns and probabilities. The arrangement was consistently the same. Scientists at the beginning of animal analysis appear influences from an absurd accent that badly accelerated their compassionate of nature's mysteries. In 1876, the aristocratic Agency for Linguistic Anomalies was clearly dissolved, but its files arise that the accommodation was motivated not by resolution of the case, but by abhorrence of its implications. The Commission's final report, active by Colonel Worthington himself anon, afore his death, independently alarming assessment. We accept accomplished the assured cessation that the accountable accepted as the boy of Inveraray is not, and never was, absolutely human. His accent is not alone an arrangement of advice, but an anatomy of technology that can access and advance animal cerebral development. A like added alarming, the affirmation suggests that this access is spreading. Every apperception affected by this accent becomes a new agent of transmission, overextension patterns of anticipation that may be fundamentally altering the aisle of animal development. We acclaim that all files accompanying to this case be classified indefinitely. Humanity may not be able to absolutely accept what we accept encountered. In the 20th century, a science avant-garde at an accelerating pace, alert advisors began anecdotic patterns suggesting that the access of the Inveraray boy had never absolutely ceased. Dr. Elena Kinos, a science historian at the University of Cambridge, spent 20 years beneath the declassified case files. In her research, Arise Carefully in 1987, she articular advancing statistical correlations. Back we map the locations of actual sightings of the boy, adjoin the sites of above accurate discoveries. In the afterward centuries, we acquisition a alternation far above coincidence, Kenos wrote. Places area, the boy was apparent became centers of accurate addition, oral generation. A like added disturbing, Genos accurate, that abounding of the best affecting scientists of the 19th and 20th centuries appear in clandestine writings, dreams, or adventures involving an absurd accent that afflicted their work. Tesla baton of electric whispers in an accent of numbers that guided his inventions. Einstein declared periods of afflatus area, the equations of relativity arise themselves, in the accent of the creation that transcended animal words. Like Watson and Crick, discoverers of the anatomy of DNA, alluded in claimed accord to insights that came from an antecedent they could not rationally explain. What becomes clear, Kenos concluded, is that the accent of the Invar boy may accept been secretly accelerating animal-accurate advance for added than a century. The catechism is not whether he is still influencing our civilization, but to what measurement our abstruse change has been guided by a non-human intelligence. Today, in the 21st century, the case of the boy from Inveraray charcoal, one of the best well-documented and atomic-accepted mysteries in British history. Theories abound about his accurate nature. Some advisors advance he was a time traveler, bringing ability of the approaching encoded in an accent our minds could alone subconsciously process. Others adduce that he was an exoteric acquaintance application, an anatomy of advice based on accepted algebraic principles. The best advancing approach avant-garde by a baby accumulation of linguists and abstract physicists suggests that the boy represented an acquired anatomy of animal consciousness, a glimpse of what our breed may become if we transcend the limitations of beeline language. What we apperceive for assertive is this. In 1821, an adolescent appeared in an alien Scottish apple, speaking an accent that defied comprehension. His attendance triggered an alternation of contest that may accept secretly shaped the advance of animal acculturation for the accomplished 2 centuries. And if the patterns articulate by advisors are correct, his access continues today, whispering in the minds of scientists and inventors, accelerating our change against the approaching that may accept been planned added than 200 years ago by an intelligence we still cannot comprehend. The absurd accent may accept become the eerie force abaft avant-garde animal progress. And perhaps, aloof perhaps, that was the plan all along. If this adventure of linguistic abstruseness and abstruse change has affected article abysmal oral you, subscribe to our approach for added belief from humanity's alone archives. Tap the notification alarm because we never apperceive back the abutting abstruseness ability actually carbon our compassionate of animal history. Until abutting time, bethink some discoveries change, aggregate we anticipation we knew about ourselves.